I'd rather create something that others criticise than create nothing and criticise others.
If you have high quality product behind the bar, it's like a weapon.
It's not about the figures, it's about who those figures are.
The Hospodpreneurs Podcast.
I'm going to drink this beer.
Yeah, let's crack them.
With James Henderson.
Hello and welcome to episode 83 of the Hospodpreneurs Podcast. Co-founder and director of Market Lane Coffee and Melbourne Coffee Merchants, Fleur is a regular speaker at Victorian food industry events. She's previously sat on awards panels like the Melbourne Food and Wine Host Plus Scholarship and is often a university guest speaker and panelist on innovation with other industry leaders. She was a recipient of the 2015 Melbourne Food and Wine Festival Trailblazer Award, and in 2016 was the State Finalist for Ernst & Young's Businessperson of the Year. She's worked with companies like Disney and lastminute.com in a marketing capacity before moving into specialty coffee, and also received the Dean's Award for Academic Excellence in her Arts and Commerce degrees at the University of Melbourne. Hello and welcome to the show, Fleur.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on. As you know, the first question I like to ask is, what is your crazy hospitality story?
Yes, so I've been racking my brains for a crazy hospitality story, and I haven't really thought of one that I necessarily think fits the bill, but one of the most special moments I've had in my career was when we first brought out Ricardo Zelaya from Guatemala to Melbourne. He came for MICE, it was the WBC, and he's a producer that we've been working with since 2009, and he came to Australia with his wife, and we brought him into Market Lane Coffee and also took him around Melbourne and around Sydney to visit clients that were using his coffee. And just watching the barista's reaction when he walked in, many of them recognised him by his face and was so excited for him to walk in, and then watching his face as he saw his coffee on the menu was one of the specialist moments in my career in coffee.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing that little story. Fleur, I'd love to know why you do what you do. What is it that really inspires you?
I think when I boil it all down, it's really the people that I get to work with through Melbourne Coffee Merchants and through Market Lane Coffee. So from our team, which is an incredible bunch of individuals that I get to work with every day, through to the communities that we're connected to through Market Lane, through our coffee shops and through our Melbourne Coffee Merchants customers that we get to work with, and then right through to at Origin with the producers that we work with. They're very deep and very meaningful relationships, and I'm really motivated to try and showcase the hard work that they're doing back here in Australia and share their stories and make their coffees famous with the end consumer. And that's kind of what gets me out of bed every morning and what I love about what I do.
What is it about those relationships that's really motivating you to give back to those communities?
Yes.
Is that the force that's really driving that? Obviously, those relationships really inspire you. What is it about building those relationships that's so inspiring?
It's different by different origin, but I think one of the main things is the potential that is there to positively impact the communities that are connected to coffee by paying good prices for the coffee and by showing up every year to purchase those coffees. In places like Rwanda, that feels extremely evident, especially coffee's played a huge role in building the economy post the genocide, and there's a lot of people that are involved in coffee there, and so you can really see that and feel that. The relationships often are 10 years or more, so we become very close to the producers that we're working with or the exporters, and they become very special friendships that we have.
Fleur, I'd love to know what you do. Tell us more about what it is that you do now, because we're going to open up discussion around how you came to do that in just a minute. So just a quick one on what it is that you do now.
So I have two businesses. One is Melbourne Coffee Merchants, and we are a green bean importer, and we work with about 7 different producing origins and bring coffees to Australia and sell them to roasters all around Australia. And then I'm also co-owner in Market Lane Coffee that I own with Jason Sheltis and Jenny Bryant. Both businesses are about 10 years old, and in terms of my role between the two businesses, in Melbourne Coffee Merchants, a lot of my focus is on sourcing, and then within Market Lane, I look after a lot of the communications in terms of the website and helping produce copy for postcards and customer communications. And I look after a lot of the branding and design elements as well. Yeah, so I guess kind of marketing within Market Lane, and then more of the sourcing and producer relationships in Melbourne Coffee Merchants.
Marketing for Market Lane and copy.
Yes.
Yeah, love that.
Storytelling.
I love that. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, cool.
You mentioned they're both about 10 years old. So what really drove both of them to evolve at the same time?
So I was working in the UK and a consumer of an amazing coffee shop called Monmouth Coffee. And it was there that I first tasted two coffees side by side and was blown away by how different they tasted. And that was kind of the point as a consumer where I considered and realised that coffee was a differentiated product and it wasn't something that tasted the same. So I'd had that experience and returned back to Australia knowing that we were eventually going to move to Australia, and was fortunate enough to be taken to St Ali, which had opened by Mark Dundon at the time, and had a wonderful coffee there. It was kind of the first small micro roastery that existed in Melbourne at the time, focused on specialty. And through conversations with Mark, learnt that there was a real lack of any coffee that was traceable, specialty grade, and had any provenance. There were big importers bringing in commercial grade coffee at the time, but there were no importers bringing in specialty grade coffee. So at that point, I identified that there was a gap in the market, and I had a keen interest in coffee, but needed to work out whether it was something that I could be really passionate about and build a business around. So I returned back to the UK and worked at Monmouth, asked them for a job, and they were very kind and allowed me to work for them for about a 6 to 9 month period. And I worked for them for free, but they in return showed me the entire business. So I worked in the roasting team, I cupped with them, and I also worked in their retail shops. And it was there serving coffee to customers that my mind was blown, and I was so excited by helping customers find the beans that they wanted to use at home and showing them how different they could taste and explaining why they tasted different. And that's when I really fell in love with coffee and decided it's what I wanted to do. So I returned to Australia and set up Melbourne Coffee Merchants, which is the importing side of our business. And it was very small at first. Our first shipment was 1 pallet of coffee for Mark at 7 Seeds. And it was really just a trial to see how easy it was to get through customs, how the coffee landed, if it tasted good. And Mark was really happy with the coffee. So we decided to ship another pallet of coffee. At the time, we were working with a business in the UK called Macanta, and they were a green bean importer. So we were essentially just representing their coffees here in Australia and shipping the coffees from the UK. And from there, the business started to organically grow. So our customers after that were Coffee Alchemy in Sydney, The Source, which was owned by Russell Beard. He's gone on to open Ribbon Hills. We sold to auction rooms in Melbourne. And slowly, through word of mouth, people started to order mixed pallets of coffee, and the business slowly grew. I was very lucky at that time that the industry was very much in its infancy. So I didn't have a lot of knowledge about coffee, but no one else did either. So together we learnt to cup. I started to learn a lot more about the coffees that I was bringing in. I started to travel to Origin, and it was a really exciting time to be in coffee. About 12 months after Melbourne Coffee Merchants was established, business was growing, but I felt a sense of, I guess, frustration and a little bit limited by being a B2B only business. There was only so much I could control in terms of the way that the coffees were being presented to customers, the stories that were being shared, what people were choosing to buy and what they were using it for. And there was still a lot of people coming to Melbourne Coffee Merchants to buy beautiful single coffees, but then still using quite commercial coffees for their blend. They were really worried about having a blend that was seasonal and that changed. So I felt quite limited within my capacity. So it was at that stage that I started to think about opening a coffee roastery. At that time, Jason was returning from Monmouth Coffee. I'd met him at Monmouth Coffee, and he was returning back to Australia. And we went out for a glass of wine, and I said to him, I really want to open a coffee roastery, and if I do, this is what I want it to look like and this is what I want it to represent. And we very quickly realised in that conversation that our values were very aligned and our vision for what our ideal coffee roastery and coffee shop would look like. So he jumped on board and we opened our first cafe and roastery at Paran Market, and that's where Market Lane started.
It's interesting because it's the opposite direction to where a lot of cafes grow. You worked a bit in the industry to see if you liked it, and then you went all the way up the supply chain to then come back down to then open a venue. So it's interesting to hear that perspective on things. I'm maybe wondering why you think other people grow the other way as opposed to the direction you guys grew.
I think a lot of people, certainly in coffee, start the other way, probably buying from an importer. Their scale is quite small. They become more curious about where the coffee is coming from. They might then travel to Origin. They fall in love with it. Their scale grows, and then over time they may have the right scale to then justify being able enough to start sourcing themselves, and probably do that in order to feel closer to the product that they are sourcing and to be able to directly impact things like the prices that are being paid for the coffee and have that deep sense of personal connection with the producer. My entry into it was probably influenced a little bit by my dad, who's a cheese importer, so he was able to help me with things like paperwork and giving me information on how to bring something into the country. I think if I had done now what I did then, it would be a lot more challenging. I definitely had, I guess, a first mover advantage in doing Melbourne Coffee Merchants 10 years ago. Now there's a lot more competition and I would have been eaten alive. It would have been a much tougher market to enter. But because what I was bringing in was new and was different, it was really exciting. And we were very conscious early on that maybe Melbourne Coffee Merchants and Market Lane might cannibalise each other, and having something that was B2C and B2B, there might be a conflict of interest. And we were very conscious of that. I think actually what has happened is the two businesses have complemented each other. With Market Lane, we've tried to set a really high bar in terms of the quality coffee that we are serving. And so a lot of our customers respect Market Lane as a coffee roaster, and we've tried to be very open with those customers about how we do things and why we do them. So there's been a lot of benefit. It's also allowed Melbourne Coffee Merchants to have a much wider peer group for cupping and for quality control and coffee buying. So when we're doing sourcing trips, we spread the load amongst the team. We make sure that there's always a group of at least 4 or 5 people in a queue session tasting and assessing coffees, and that's been really beneficial as well.
Yeah, fantastic. You mentioned there that you obviously learnt from your dad in that process as well. Is there anything that you over the years now have taken away and gone, wow, that's something that I'm so glad he taught me back then?
Yeah, I think the influence of Dad probably started from a very young age. We grew up in a household that really celebrated food, and it was a big part of our everyday lives. And we often, if there was a new bakery opening across town or if there was a new farmer's market, we'd be trekking across town to try it and buy the produce and cook together and talk about how it tasted. And that was a big part of our daily home life, and when we travelled, also a big part of that. Dad's business was focused around specialty cheese, and he came into Australia in the 1980s and discovered that there was no artisan specialty cheese. So over 3 decades, he worked really hard to build a market for specialty cheese, educate people about it. And I think the biggest influence he had on me was just watching how passionate he was about what he did. And that was really inspiring and definitely has influenced my approach to coffee. And I think I was really excited when I discovered coffee because I could see the same gap in knowledge and in consumer understanding of the potential that existed within coffee. And so I think, yeah, that probably really influenced my journey.
What about in terms of when you actually started going through that process of importing coffee?
Yeah.
Was there anything that he was able to share, maybe some insights around, obviously laws have changed a lot since then, but anything that you think has really held you guys in good stead in the last 10 years?
In terms of like the logistics of importing, there was some contacts that he had that helped us clear the goods that may have felt really overwhelming to navigate on my own. But I think the bigger influences have been things like having an uncompromising approach to quality. Quality has always been really important to Dad within his business, and that's definitely something that's carried through into the way that we run our business. Really caring about the producers. Dad has really nurtured long-term relationships with cheese producers, and again, that's a core value of ours. So it's probably those values that have carried across. To be honest, with our first pallet of coffee that we bought, it came on an LCL shipment, which is like a less than container load shipment mixed with other goods. And we read all the paperwork and went, oh, this is way too complicated. Let's just import it and see what happens. And the worst case is that we've lost $10,000 or whatever the value was on trying to bring it in. And in bringing it in, we realised it wasn't actually that complicated. Cheese is a lot more complicated because it's got to be in a refrigerated container and there's a lot more that can go wrong, whereas coffee is more stable, so it's not as complicated.
Wow. There's been a lot of talk on fair trade. I'd like to ask you your perspective because there have been all sorts of opinions around what a fair trade stamp means. You know, when people actually talk about fair trade, some people have said it's just a marketing gimmick. So I'd like to hear what you say about fair trade.
So we do get requests in the coffee shop for fair trade coffee, and what we explain to our customers is that our coffee is fairly traded, but it's not a fair trade branded coffee. Fair trade essentially means that the producer is going to get a certain price above the commodity commodity price for coffee, and they're guaranteed to get that price. One of the challenges with it at the specialty end of the market is it doesn't have any relationship with the quality of the coffee. So it's not guaranteeing or giving a premium for a certain quality of coffee, and it also doesn't guarantee demand. So it guarantees a minimum price, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that demand is going to be there for that coffee. The other challenge is that it often leads to no traceability. So the traceability of that coffee is lost through that process. So for us, we talk to the farmers directly about the price that they want for the coffee. And that's generally the price that we pay. And it's much more important to be paying a price that is sustainable for the farmer, that will keep them in the business for the long term and be able to invest in their farms and invest in quality in the long term, to be showing up every year, purchase that coffee, ideally purchase more of that coffee, and pay premiums for the quality of coffee that they are producing. And that is a much more sustainable business model than paying a minimum price that is sometimes really good, but if the C market goes above it, it becomes irrelevant.
Does that mean that fair trade is potentially a stamp for commodity coffee?
It often is, yes.
Instead of, but I mean, not for specialty coffee. Like, should specialty importers, roasters, cafes, baristas be talking about fair trade? Is that just driven by the consumer wanting fair trade coffee? Is it actually something that we should be considering?
I think it is important in commodity and commercial coffee, but I don't think it has a place in specialty coffee. I think one of the challenges for the consumer is it's really hard to navigate who is paying fair prices to the producer. And fair trade is showing that a minimum price has been paid, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that price is covering the cost of production or is giving the producer a fair profit. It's just giving reassurance that a minimum price has been paid for that coffee.
How can coffee importers be more transparent with what they're doing in that sense then?
So we have done a huge blog post on this on our Melbourne Coffee Merchants website. There's been a trend recently to showcasing the FOB, so free on board price for coffee that's been paid, or the farm gate price for coffee. And there's several roasters that have started to do that, including Seven Seeds. And the motivation behind it is to try and show that a fair price has been paid for the coffee. In the way that we source coffee, as I said before, it's always a very open and fairly simple dialogue with producers to ask them what the price of the coffee is. And generally that's the price we pay. Sometimes we might go to a producer and say, we need to buy X amount of coffee and we're looking to see what coffees you've got that might hit a certain price point. And that might be for a customer locally here that has a certain price point that they're trying to meet for their blend. And so they might show us a selection of coffees that meet that particular price. But generally we're cupping everything that they have to offer and selecting the very best lots and then asking them what the price is, and that's the price we pay. And it's a pretty straightforward and pretty simple conversation. In response to the move to more transparent pricing, we're starting to have dialogues with producers around whether they feel comfortable sharing those prices, and it's really complicated and complex. Some producers don't want the prices we're paying shared externally and available on the internet, and there's a myriad of reasons for it. Sometimes it might be that they're selling to 20 other customers and they've got to manage those prices according to volume and quality, and it could potentially have a negative effect on the prices that they're securing from other buyers. Sometimes it might be that there's tax evasion going on because they have to publish a price and then pay the government. That isn't really with the producers that we're working with, but it is a concern that they've expressed for other producers. Sometimes it's security, like they don't want their neighbours to know the prices that they're securing for the coffee because it might then put them at a security risk with their surrounding community. So there's many different reasons, but for roasters that are wanting to do that, we're asking that first of all, that we get permission from the producer, and secondly, that from the roasting customer there is a commitment to purchasing over a period of time rather than purchasing spot, so that the producer then has some security in that relationship. But that is just one aspect of transparency. The price is only one tiny part of the puzzle, and there's a lot more questions that need to be asked and information that needs to be shared. We're also trying as much as possible to not just ask things of the producer in terms of the price that they might be paying pickers for the coffee, or if it's a co-op, what they're paying co-op members, but also then be transparent in what we share to them about how we're selling their coffee, where it's ending up, the prices we're selling the coffee at. So trying to make that information exchange go both ways rather than just down the chain.
Yes. Is it just an education piece then?
It definitely is an education piece. There's a lot of really great roasters at the moment trying to navigate how to improve transparency in the coffee chain. There's some really great initiatives that have been started. There's the Transparency Pledge, where roasters are pledging to communicate FOB pricing. I think the challenge is that to the consumer, those prices are really hard to unpick and to navigate. And I think it's really hard to expect the consumer to do that. So I think as an industry, we need to find a way to make it really easy. So like the Fair Trade certification, there is some kind of way to communicate to consumers that they're buying coffee that has been fairly traded and a price has been paid that is sustainable. But I don't think we've come up with that yet as an industry.
I'd like to know where you think things are innovating now. So where are coffee importers innovating at the moment?
I think there's a lot of innovation happening at a producer level with processing and experimentation and planting new varieties. We're definitely seeing a much wider range of varieties being planted in different countries, and that's really exciting to see how a geisha tastes when it's grown in Guatemala, or what honey processing or naturally processing a coffee tastes like in Bolivia. So definitely seeing a lot of innovation there. There's also a lot more technology now, which means that connectivity with producers is much easier. And there's definitely some innovations in technology which are helping information exchange and coding of information at a producer level right through to our end. And I think that is really exciting and has a lot of potential. There's some amazing work that's been done by World Coffee Research into new varieties, and that's a really exciting not-for-profit that we are supporting through Market Lane and Melbourne Coffee Merchants. And one of the most exciting things about it is that it's the first kind of global initiative where they're trying to openly share all of their findings with anyone that wants to access that information. It's been spearheaded by Tim Schilling, who has done incredible work in Rwanda post the genocide in introducing specialty coffee there, and he's since gone on to set up the World Coffee Research, and that's trying to tackle issues like climate change and finding varieties that are going to be resistant to climate change and improve the yields of producers to make coffee and continue to make coffee a viable crop for them. So there's some really exciting things happening there.
Because obviously the price of coffee is increasing. So what factors do you see that being driven by?
So actually, devastating, the price of coffee is decreasing. So at the moment, the commercial price for coffee on the New York Stock Exchange is well below the cost of production. It's devastatingly low, and it's been low for quite a few months. And as a result, there's a lot of coffee producers, especially within places that have the potential to produce great quality coffee, are starting to exit coffee and plant other crops that are going to offer them a better source of income, or they're completely abandoning their farms altogether. So that's where, as an industry, a lot of people have stepped up and have started to talk about trying to improve transparency in the coffee chain to allow roasters that are paying prices way above the commercial price to be able to market and explain to customers that the prices they are paying are sustainable and viable. So that's where the potential for specialty really needs to step up, and we do need to be making sure that we are continuing to increase the prices that we're paying for coffee.
Yes. So where does the confusion come about around the price of coffee?
So most coffee is traded as a commodity on the commodity market. Specialty buyers and some specialty coffee roasters and some importers do trade outside of that. A lot of importers use that as a benchmark. So they might say, okay, the commodity market is this, and we'll play that plus a certain premium, but they'll still peg it to the C market. But ideally, the price would be dictated completely outside of the commodity market, which is extremely volatile.
Yes.
And there would be a benchmark that is set outside of that. We trade in that way, so we do not look at what is happening in the commodity market at all, but most importers would work in that way. There's some really exciting work that's being done by Emory University, and they've produced a guide called the Specialty Coffee Transaction Guide, and they've been gathering data from a wide range of coffee roasters and importers, purchasing data, and they've been putting it into tables and graphs and basically showing what the average price is for a 82 to 84 scoring coffee in Colombia, what the average price has been paid, and then maybe what the price is for an 84 to 86. They look at lot size and a myriad of other factors. And the idea behind the guide is that over time, as that data becomes more robust and there's more people contributing to it, it becomes a new benchmarking tool for coffee buyers and for producers to use to benchmark the prices that they should be getting paid for coffee. So that's a really exciting thing that is happening within the industry.
Yeah, I'm smiling and nodding because that is very exciting for someone like myself. I obviously love the numbers. I'm going to follow that up. I'd love to have a chat with those guys. Fleur, I'd also like to ask on a different note around creativity. How do you make creative decisions?
That's a really good question. We've been really lucky through Market Lane to have a design agency from the get-go. So we work with a creative agency called Swearwords who have done all of our packaging and all of our design. And they've been really good at creating, I guess, a look and feel that is consistent. And within our shops, we've placed quite a heavy focus on retailing coffee and retailing coffee equipment. And part of the motivation for that is that we really want people to brew great coffee at home and we want to make it super easy for them. And that is a key focus for our business. And we want to do that because it means that we can buy more amazing coffees and share them within our shops. We, as a team, have away days. So we often go away for a day or for a weekend and get away from the business to reflect. And definitely creating that time and space has been really powerful. And it's often when we make some of our best decisions because we've got that time and we're not running around in the moment. And on those sessions, we'll look at what we're really proud of, what we wish we could improve. We plan our kind of strategy and articulate what we want to achieve over the next 12 to 24 months. And that's been quite valuable. I think creating time and space like that has been the most powerful way that we've done that.
I'd also like to know how you've handled competitors coming into the space over the last 10 years.
So the space has changed a lot, especially the coffee industry has changed a lot over the last 10 years and in many ways, in very positive ways. In terms of competition, we don't really consider other specialty roasters in the space for Market Lane to be our competitors because we're all gunning for the same thing. We all want to improve the quality of coffee that's available. We want to make sure that producers are getting paid great prices and we want to build the market for specialty coffee. So I definitely don't perceive specialty coffee roasters to be our competition. It's definitely more at the commercial end that we would perceive to be our competition. With the green bean side of the industry, that is also fiercely competitive. I do think it's good competition. I think there's probably a little bit of oversupply, but generally I think the competition is good. It makes us stay really focused on making sure that the quality of coffee that we're bringing in is the very best that it can be. We don't really take too much notice of it, to be honest. We really try and just focus on doing a really good job and providing really good customer service to our customers. I think now the Australian market is maturing quite a bit and that has had some negative impact. So I think one of the negative impact has been in the roasted wholesale market. There is a lot of roasters in the space all competing for wholesale roasted coffee and that has led to downward pressure on wholesale prices, the average wholesale price. And as a result, I think the quality of the green coffee that people are putting in their blend has been reduced because they can't sustain the prices for better quality coffee. So I think that's really disappointing and I don't know what the solution is to change it, but I think one of the challenges has been that the average price of a cup of coffee in Australia has not increased like it has in other countries. So I was in the States recently and a cup of coffee over there is $5, $6, and here it's $4.50. In Sydney it's probably lower. So I think as an industry and as leaders in the specialty coffee industry, we have a responsibility to increase prices to allow for cafes to make more money from coffee to then allow them to buy better quality green coffee to put in their blends. That is one of the downsides of the intense competition.
What's your biggest challenge right now?
At the moment, our business is going through a stage where we're not opening a new coffee shop tomorrow, which is a really nice thing. And we're really just focusing on consolidating and trying to do things better, which is a really nice place to be in. When we have grown and opened new shops, it's been a really exciting time for the business, but it also can be challenging because it's distracting and other parts of the business can suffer during those growth periods. But definitely now at a size and at a scale where we have enough scale to justify people within certain roles in the business who can do a much better job at looking after things than historically Jason and I would have been able to do. So we have someone that looks after HR, someone that looks after training, team that looks after wholesale, and so we can really start to try and look after those parts of the business. It also gives us an opportunity to step back and look at parts of the business where we know we can do better. So sustainability has always been a core value for the business, but there's definitely ways that we can improve the way we're addressing how we're dealing with waste or how we're packaging our goods. And so that is an area that we're really trying to focus on at the moment and improve. We're in the midst of going through our B Corp certification at the moment, and that's another really interesting process for us to go through. I think one of the challenges for Melbourne coffee merchants at the moment is the dollar. The dollar is about 67 cents. It was 75 cents last year. So as a business, we need to make sure that we're still rolling up to the producers and paying them the same price that we did last year. but locally here with roasters, explaining to them why the prices have increased. So that's one of the challenges on the green side.
And on the currency front, some of these countries, having a finance background myself, they may be pegged to the US dollar.
Yes. Yep.
So they might not have floating currencies as well. So obviously, you're highly dependent on the US dollar.
Yeah, and all of the coffee contracts are negotiated in the US dollar.
Yeah.
So one thing that is often forgotten is some countries will be dealing with their own currency fluctuations in relation to the US dollar, and that can either be positive or negative, but all of our negotiations are in the US dollar. So we do hedge and we do things, but there's only so much you can do with that. And then, at the moment it's tough.
See, that's an exciting world for me. I'm going to, outside of this show, I'm going to be looking a lot into that. I'd like to know, Fleur, ultimately, where do you want MCM and Market Lane to be?
This is a really interesting question and one that I often struggle to answer. If you'd asked me 10 years ago if we would have 6 coffee shops with Market Lane, I would have said absolutely not. We've grown partly because the business model has necessitated it. So we've needed a certain scale to make the business model work. We only do coffee, and so we've needed a certain scale to make the business model work. So I would like to sit here and tell you we won't open any more coffee shops, but I can't promise that will happen. A lot of them, the later ones, have happened because there's been an amazing opportunity or an amazing site that we can't walk away from. But we're definitely not actively looking to open more retail. I think we just genuinely want to be doing things in the most sustainable and best way possible within the business. We really want to be looking after our staff, creating opportunities for them to develop within the business. For Melbourne Coffee Merchants as well, the goal isn't to grow dramatically. We want to grow sustainably with our producers. Definitely every year they ask us how much more we can buy. So trying to grow with them over time is what motivates us, and invest more heavily in some origins where we're not as strong. So Ethiopia, Colombia and Kenya are probably our newest origins, and where we definitely have work in deepening the relationships with the producers.
They're all big coffee suppliers as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
and some of it's structural. So in Ethiopia now, it's much easier to build direct relationships with private washing stations or cooperatives.
Yes.
So we're investing quite heavily in those supply relationships at the moment.
I have one last question for you. Who would you like to hear on the show next?
Oh, well, I'd love you to interview Tim Schilling from World Coffee Research. He's one of my coffee heroes. I think Chad from the Specialty Coffee Guard would be amazing. Yeah, they'd be my top 2 picks.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for being on the show today, Fleur. It's been lovely to have you on.
The show today was produced by the in-house audio team at Hospopreneurs, led by Jake Olver. Voiceovers were by Angus Brennan. To learn more, head to hospopreneurs.com.